various mix of materials that I see. Okay, so when especially the school projects that I see, there's a mix of material and different kind of experimentation happening with material. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that I see from you. So with this, keeping that particular thing in background, I just wanted to check with you as in the COVID-19 era, okay, are you looking at emergence of any new technology or any new techniques, construction techniques, with this particular lockdown and all these things that is happening around? So are you seeing anything which coming up?
Hi, good evening, everyone. At best, I can represent a very small minority of architects who practice out of small towns, relatively small towns, with a population of, let's say, less than 1 million in India. And what my views will not necessarily reflect the people who work out of metros where your biggest markets are. Since you mentioned teacher thing, I think I'll refrain from wearing my professor hat and be a little more anecdotal in this. In a small town, I guess what happens is there will always be a critique of this pan-region kind of criteria that people start establishing for anything that happens. I mean, whether it's the way a building type has to be designed specifically. I had this big argument with people like, PricewaterhouseCoopers kind of organizations where they say, okay, these are the criteria for tier 2 cities across India. And I've always had, always used to take whatever reports that they produce with a little bit of a pinch of salt, okay? Because I think the dynamics differ. So the advantage of living in a small town is that you have plenty of time. Okay? So this extra time that we've got because of this COVID thing has not really made us, restless as much as as the rest of y'all. Because even when there are ups and downs in the economy, by the time it distills and reaches us, it doesn't have that big an impact. It has an impact. I'm not denying that there's no impact, but it has very little impact. I'm going to be very simple in the way I look at it as a practicing architect. In the last 2 decades that I've worked out of Mangalore, there are 2 distinct periods in the life of a building that we design and build. One is the structure part. You talk about the foundations and building in the walls and plastering and everything, and then there is this thing that comes in, the desirables and the aspirational aspects, which include a lot of things. I mean, in terms of building systems, it could be lighting, it could be furniture, it could be so many things. If you ask me about, if I roll back 10, 15 years, the time and the cost were approximately 70% of what is local already. Everything was local, including even if I needed a sofa, probably the market couldn't afford the option of importing one or sourcing the best sofa in the country. So we have to really actually work and design a sofa, get it built locally, and then put it in our. That has changed. Okay, the affordability, the economy has grown so big, and Mangalore is unique in a lot of ways that the per capita usage of broadband, for example, is one of the highest in the country after Bombay, I'm told. There are some anecdotal stories like this, that KFC made the most on-book, the fastest on-book profit after their store in Bombay. The one that beat Bombay was supposedly from Mangalore. So we are working in a very different kind of an environment. So I'm going back to the components, 2 components of the building when we build a building. I'm not touching upon the design time. We get plenty of time to design in Mangalore, but the construction aspect, 70% used to be localized and structure oriented, and about 30% used to be, finishing materials like tiles, fixtures, appliances, furniture, and everything else we brought from outside. That has changed in the last 15 years, especially in the last 6 or 7 years. Most of these aspirations, people are well informed. People know about about they know about brands, they know about the quality of life that they would want to have within the comforts of their home. They know about comforts, they know where the priorities are. Bangalore is not that big in terms of mass housing. We still have a huge percentage of people who live in individual houses. Even when it comes to mass housing, I mean, you take an extreme case of an apartment in Bombay, 350 square feet would be considered a luxury for a upper middle class. Here, nothing below 1,500 square feet sells. That's how it works. I mean, nobody even buys a single bedroom apartment. So if you look at all these things, sustainability coming into the picture right now, given this kind of a premise, a lot has already been talked about sustainability and the environment, because there are regulations in place. Every product manufacturer you're talking about from an environmental sustainability point of view tends to probably even put this as a sales pitch that, we are so green. How green is my carpet? I may not use a carpet, but the carpet manufacturer is already talking about how green his carpet is, which was again a matter of debate when the first IGBC conference that was held in Hyderabad about 10 years back, and it was sponsored by a carpet manufacturer from Sweden, if I'm not wrong. And there was a question by one of the people in the audience and said, well, fine, thank you very much for sponsoring the event, but I have never used a carpet in my life. So the relevance to a market which consists of this kind of sensibility in small towns, I think is very, very different from what happens in mass market when you talk about cities. I guess, the aspirational and desirable components of going to a building are a small component probably of the total economic sales when it comes to a building product. Let's stick to lighting, for example. But if you look at the volumes, it's not there. We don't have the volumes in small towns. But if you look at the number of people per capita usage of a particular product, I think it's very, very high. So I'm just an architect. I make it my business to stick to my profession. So I cannot talk about how the world works. I cannot talk about how businesses work. But what I understand by sustainability is, I think it's closely linked to. I mean, you cannot talk about one thing separated from the other. It's about affordability. It's about desirability. It's about what people can afford. It's what people everything. So I think now it's time, I think, to kind of look at the whole thing in a very different way. We have not reached the level of sophistication in terms of usage of these desirable and aspirational aspects of things that go into a building to an extent that the other cities probably have gone into. We are in a good place, actually, to make this kind of decision. I hope that answers some of your questions. But
I think in sum total, what I'm trying to understand is that in a Class B city, the houses that you are building and all this kind of stuff has more sustainability. But in a mass market, in urban mass market like Bangalore and other places, we put some compromises in the sustainability aspect of it. That's the sum total that I'm trying to understand from this particular pitch. Also, Nelson, one thought is there's a lot of maintenance issues, and are you looking at building, for example, hospitality is going down, and not too many people are visiting hotels. For a very long time. I think the entire lockdown period and post-lockdown period also we will have a very less. The hospitality industry is worst hit kind of a stuff. And those buildings and all those buildings which become auto maintenance, they have to get into some kind of a maintenance and auto maintenance kind of mode. What do you think if it is not repurposed? One is repurposing. If it is not repurposed, how do you think the maintenance will work? Are there any kind of thoughts on that particular thing?
Generally speaking, when you talk about maintenance as such, I mean, in my my understanding, if a building is built well, okay, if it is designed well and built well, actually designed well more than built well, because if there is no skill available to build in a particular way, you kind of compromise in the way you design, or you limit the complexity of design in such a way that it can be built in this place using the limited skills that one person has. I've been a great student of an architect from I've been a student of a great architect from Sri Lanka, Jeffrey Bawa. If I look at his works, and I even went on a long pilgrimage once to understand how that man really did what he did. And I think if there's one thing that he understood, is the limits of skill. Now that has a role to play in the way a building is designed, in specifically in the way you make choices of building systems and materials. Now, if you look at architecture of certain regions where there is no access to that kind of maintenance and upkeep, then you actually design with the limited availability of that particular service. Having said that, when it comes to these aspirational and desirable goods that go into a building, I think the world or the system or the entire this whole business world which supplies and manufactures this thing has to now rethink. Okay, when you buy a product, a well-designed product, let's say from a company like, I don't know whether I'm allowed to name brands here, and whether I get the name and the pronunciation right. Let's say Braun from Germany, Miele from Germany. If you buy a product like that, you actually don't have to worry. You don't really have to worry. Smaran was talking about China. There's a disclaimer. I've never been to China. Though there are a lot of clients who say, this is, if they ask me to suggest, we don't really patronize any particular product as such, but when we give them the choices, they're never usually a product choice from China at all. Even though there have been several instances where they keep on insisting that the same thing you get it cheaper. I said, don't buy it. Let's do away with that one particular item than buying a substandard one. So I have never been to China for that reason. I may go to see the Great Wall of China someday, but definitely not to go with a client to go and buy a product from China. That's something I. So I guess then, recently I had gone to I can take another 2 minutes. And the way the manufacturing of a particular furniture item happens, okay, there's a whole lot of stuff which is related to the intellectual property of the design when you build a certain thing, which need not necessarily be built in optimized, cost-optimized setup. Eventually, I see these kind of things being probably printed on a 3D printer or a small scale, profile. I'll give you an example, like a lighting. The LEDs are manufactured by very few companies worldwide. Most of them are in China. Fine, probably someday some sense will prevail, and then these will get manufactured in many places. But if you take a profile, why can't I extrude this profile in probably aluminum factory closest to my place? There is one in Belgaum. If you give them a profile, they'll. But protecting the intellectual property and within the controlled environment, if I can get those profiles, why do I have to depend on China? Is the question. I don't know whether this will work. Maybe there is somebody in Kickstarter who's making one little contraption which you can brew your own beer in the comfort of your own house by putting certain code and stuff like that. Then why can't we do this with the appliances and systems we use in our buildings? Unless they are huge, big things which you cannot carry and manufacture. I don't know. I think there's time to think about all these things. Eventually, I guess this decentralization of manufacturing, rather than just talking about an iPhone which says made with pride, designed with pride in California. Everything else gets built somewhere else. Why can't you take pride in the fact that you can actually get it done in an optimized way, in different parts of the world, rather than making this huge mistake of making one country the factory of the world and facing the problems that we are facing. So I think decentralization is the key. I don't know. This is
Yeah, thanks, Nelson. So what I understand from this is that a well-designed product needs low maintenance. Okay, and even in buildings, even in houses, whatever we do, if it is well designed, then it requires low maintenance, or it can be auto maintenance. And even the choice of products has to be, every piece of the building has to have that kind of a quality. So if that is taken care, then there is a low maintenance on that. Is a kind of overall summary that I can see from. Okay, thanks, Nelson.
Thank you.
Sumanth, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Samartha. So before I move to the next one, I would like to request attendees, if I see some of them raising their hands, if you have questions, you could please type in on the chat window. We will have them answered from the panelists at the end of the session. So our next topic is space design. Thank you, Mr. Ravi. So you have seen, you have done a lot of iconic projects. You work across Asia. You do large number of projects. So what we are seeing is the current space designs are constructed keeping in mind the human traffic and the social interactions. So if you look at co-working spaces, they are also based on this philosophy. Office desks over the years are continuously coming down, right? So what kind of changes do we see in the furniture design post COVID-19? Do we see there'll be we also see that there is a lot of travel restrictions, and this travel restrictions is going to be there for a long time. Hospitality industry is the most affected among these. What do you think about the space design? What kind of changes do you see? I think you're muted. If you could unmute, please.
Yeah, you can hear me now? Yeah. A year and a half back, or a year back almost, we finished a project which was called as the India Technology Center for Cadence in Pune. It's a 4.5 lakh square feet carpet area, which was a very large testing facility where they actually put turbines through a 1 million cycle in very intense sort of conditions of insulated sort of atmospheric conditions of weather in terms of temperature, air volumes, heat, and wind, etc. Now, when we designed this whole campus building, also annexed the corporate office in the same city, we were having discussions with Cummins, and we realized that 30% of their population do not even sit in their desks most of the time. So it's only 70 or 60% of the population who are actually, as out of the total 100% employee capital that they have in that particular city, really habituate in those two offices and operate on any workspace requirement and time regime. So we decided that consciously with the Indian CEO head Anant Talwalekar, we decided that we are actually going to only provide 60% stations, only 60% workstations or cabins or various kind of workspaces required for the whole employee population. And also look at, there's a possibility that 10 to 12% of that might also work from home, or they might be outside in some other city within India. So there might be some complex requisites of distant working requisites for that particular period of time. So, the possibilities of such kind is also emerging, is already there in the market. And it's just that logistically a lot of practices have not really explored that potential, or really introspected and tried to find out what is it that they actually need as a real estate footprint for their offices, which is one big question. So therefore, when you look at that, that will alter the nature of furniture. Otherwise, I think in terms of the working condition of what one would need as ergonomics or Manasara or a sort of a workspace requirement for one individual, that is not going to change on a paradigm shift. Of course, issues of health, safety, and wellness, requisites or certification programs will be, initiating a lot of requisites for each individual cabin, meeting or reception or, pantry, the the restroom areas. So that sort of workspace areas will definitely go into new derivatives of understandings after this particular situation. But other than that, the geometry of it is not going to drastically not change prima facie. I think the aspect of design, the aspect of innovation, and the idea of style that one needs to bring in to the making of any object, to make it look happy for us to use, that disconnect is something that's never changed from a billion years. I think for us, that instinctive sort of epistemological connect to want to look at design in a beautiful way as an object and also enjoy it functionally and be with it will always remain the same. But the nature of services and engineering is going to drastically change. It's drastically going to change and go into a humongous shift. Already I have very lead specialists, good consultants from the country writing and copying papers to me on air conditioning systems, on electrical systems, on security and access control systems, and thermal sort of reverberation of workspace requirements. So there's a lot of already research going on in this particular field, and people have already started publishing papers. And also the project that we're working currently on, 1800 sort of bed hospital for the COVID-19 medical wards. So that itself is giving us a lot of information and semantics to understand how workspaces will be. And trust me, a lot of workspace environments today in terms of service engineering is going to become redundant. If they have stringent laws in the country to restrict people from habituating such spaces or even checking into hospitality spaces of such kind. So that will be a very, very big challenge. But prima facie, if you go back and look at the vernacular or look at a simple, methods of sort of passive systems of sustainability that we always incorporated in our, architecture historically, or even, in the 40s and 50s and 60s when, Königsberger or even the British introduced the idea of a building in a garden and wanted to do a very sort of hygiene kind of a city, post many sort of changes from the vernacular impact of what was done. There was a lot of, understanding of how you can live in a natural environment, trying to sort of bring back the nature into our sort of habitual spaces can be effective. And I think that is a fantastic answer. That will not change. And that is still today a valid answer for us to be in atmospheres which are accurate. And so therefore, I think for us, we have to try and be as natural as we can be to live with the environment, look at furniture spaces and designs which are as much as natural as it can be, and definitely look at recognizing the engineering and services aspects of the building in a very carefully modulated method.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there will be a definitely paradigm shift in terms of how the services will be designed and implemented. We know that we have seen that now design spaces have become multi-purpose. So in commercial spaces, what kind of changes would happen in the say hospitality or healthcare industries for it to become multi-purpose?
In terms of the commercial spaces, I think definitely the municipality or the statutory regulations must recognize the land use pattern and the change. They must bring in a new idea for what is residential and what is, commercial. I think, that needs a very, very deep introspection, because today we realize that when you lock down, what happens to zones and the gridiron matrix of a city, fails miserably, completely. Today, even if you take your vehicle and start moving in the city, in the suburbs of Bangalore or in the, smaller sort of districts within Bangalore, you tend to not want to take the prime lanes. You don't want to touch the primary road, tertiary road when the traffic is intense. You tend to go into smaller lanes, you go into residential areas, you go into smaller sub lanes, and you figure out a new method to come into one particular point which you think is very intelligent. This is the problem with grid iron. So, and I'm fascinated to see how, small groups of houses or the street have started understanding how to block their own roads from, letting them be thoroughfares. One is, of course, they want to protect their particular street from having anyone come in or exit out for the lockdown, which is one parameter. The second parameter is very interesting, is when I was looking at two of the zones, and I realized that people have started enjoying the idea of a cul-de-sac. They don't want these thoroughfare systems. So what I mean to say that regulation has to understand these parameters and grow into a new environment. How do you bring in also activities of commercial or hospital or medical needs into a certain zone in an intelligent way becomes important. We have to be socialists. We can't go privatized in every operation. Today, every hospital, private hospital cannot operate or run or have taken a position to shut down when the government raises a flag and says these are the restrictions. So there are only government institutions operating, which is such a big shame. The quantum of investment that all our tax-paid monies and our funding have supported a lot of privatized hospitals. Bombay is a disaster. One of the 5 most leading large, hospital bases have just refused to accept any patients to walk in and shut down medical support. So we need to sort of introspect and see how much this program of privatization will work. So all this will have an impact in the environment that we live and the regulations that we promote and how the government will reciprocate to the space where we live. So these, I think, are relevant positions of discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Thank you for your time. Really valuable inputs, valuable views shared by you. There are a lot of key takeaways. So we shall move to the next topic. Over to you, Samartha.
Hi, Jay. So, Jay, you have been, So you have been a globally successful architect. You have designed a lot of things in New York, and you have now stepped into India. And you are wanting to build a manufacturing and build a great brand from India, and you want to supply across the world. Okay, so, and you have been doing, we have seen the kind of furniture that you design and the way you take care of your manufacturing, and you're very, the kind of detailed, there is a relentless sensitivity to design, there is a sensitivity to quality and all that kind of stuff. So we know what you mean. In this, okay, with this kind of a background that you have, okay, there are few questions. Okay, we are doing an excessive imports from China, and also there is a unorganized and a very heterogeneous competition out there. Okay, so with that kind of a scenario, with that kind of a background, few questions: how do you compete with China, or will you be moving up and compete with European brands? And how do you balance? How do you get this kind of a balance between cost and quality kind of stuff?
Thanks, Samarth. I'm going to talk about a few points which are relevant to today, right? Starting with ushering in the new normal. We're currently going through a very abrupt and painful change as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we all know that things returning to normal as we know, it probably won't happen anytime soon. It is even possible that it won't happen at all. The pandemic has brought into question our values, priorities, and practices at the business level. Lockdowns and shutdowns afforded us all the time to do this, right? If you haven't done any reflection in your business or personal life, now is a very good time to do so. Recently, we've seen things change so quickly that we didn't even get time to react or adjust. I never thought I'd see a day where I wouldn't see an airplane fly by, yet here we are. Apart from the aviation industry, we've seen many other businesses desperately clinging on to survival. Nobody knows how long we need to carry on like this, but we need to adjust and be prepared for what is likely to become our new normal. Opportunities in the new normal. The situation is certainly dire, and the future of this new normal may look bleak. We all are certainly being pushed outside of our comfort zones right now, but if we pay attention, there are silver linings around us. While we have seen many businesses fail, we have also seen others thrive. Those businesses with sound fundamentals and the ability to adapt quickly have been able to continue operating despite the current situation. So there is hope, and maybe the new normal may not be as terrible as we think. Perhaps this new normal is not even set. Could it still be malleable and could we shape it according to our vision? Today we are talking about local sourcing and bringing manufacturing back home to India. We've seen the pandemic slow down the global economy to a crawl. Countries with complex supply chains and heavy reliance on overseas partners are beginning to see the repercussions. We're going to be seeing a shift soon. Countries are going to start diversifying the supply chains and many are going to look inward. There will be a big push for independence and self-reliance when it comes to supply and manufacturing. India should be doing the same. Even before COVID-19, India is already poised to set up more manufacturing capabilities right at home. And yet we have still not done this. Now is certainly the time to head into this direction. As a country, we should be doing what we can to tap into the workforce that is already present here. This is a tremendous challenge, I think. It is a move that requires a unified vision, a realistic set of strategies, and strong discipline. If I talk about us, Gorsia Design, and our production, Gorsia Design has been working on bringing production back home to India for the last several years. Although we import most of our raw materials from overseas, our creative talent, workforce, and manufacturing infrastructure are based right here in Calcutta. Having production at home has many advantages for us and our customers. We have direct production oversight. This means that we have control and flexibility in our design and processes. We can implement a high level of quality control in our manufacturing. Our clients can also trace the origins of their purchases. They can visit the production facilities if they wish. This allows them the opportunity to see with their own eyes how products are being made. Having our production local and available for inspection also gives us the opportunity to educate our clients. This is a big reason why we are giving our showroom a massive facelift. We want to show our clients just how good, in fact, just how much better local products can be compared to international competition. In our business, we see a lot of clients do impulse buying. I've done it with my clients. This typically happens when they're on a trip abroad. They see and immediately buy furniture simply. It comes from Europe or because it has a luxury brand stamped on it. We see our clients spend so much on exchange rates, shipping and import duties. On top of that, there's a long transit time before the item even arrives back home. And after all that, the furniture may not even fit the style or the space it's supposed to occupy. It really begs the question, are customers buying real value or are they buying hype and branding? This is why we go through great lengths to ensure that we make no compromises in build quality. We want to make furniture that lasts a very long time. Imagine a range of products that last through generations. Having production right here gives us the ability to support our customers and products long term. We can make spare parts and perform refurbishments real quick. We can even provide commission options so that everything can be fitted in the intended space. And we can do this at a fraction of what the European luxury brands charge our clients. I think cheap is out and quality is in. As mentioned before, we're entering uncharted territory in the new normal. Countries around the world have shut their economies to combat the pandemic. As we enter the economic recovery phase, we know that resources are going to be scarce and discretionary spending will be reduced. We will see more cheaply made goods entering the markets. Now, I just want to point out that even if it has a luxury brand on it, it can still be cheaply made. Having said that, there will always be room for quality regardless of how tight budgets are. I believe that this is the time for originality and creativity. Tapping into and capitalizing on heritage and culture has never been more relevant. I think there will always be a demand for cheap products as long as a throwaway market exists. But in the true spirit of innovation and sustainability, quality and value for money will always have its place. At Gorsia Design, we want our customers to know that we hold ourselves accountable for each product that leaves the factory floor. It is our job to educate and show our customers the value that is being built into each furniture piece. We want our customers to know and feel this value with every purchase they make with us. So we challenge ourselves to always be pushing the boundaries of excellence and quality. We invest heavily in our people and our tools. We are constantly upskilling our workforce and doing industry best practices. We are also integrating the latest technologies in our production. The current status is a great opportunity. There is a great opportunity here in India, but the current system we have doesn't make it easy for us to set up or operate a local manufacturing business. For example, in our business, we pay a 30% tariff on the raw materials that we import. This places us at a price disadvantage, especially when we are trying to compete with brands from China and Europe. The Indian government really should be doing more to support local businesses and implementing smarter strategies to nurture the growth of local industries. Not only that, we should also be making it easier to attract foreign investments by making it easier for foreign companies to set up operations locally. My final thoughts: the current global situation presents this country with a rare opportunity. There is a real chance for India to position itself and accelerate growth at a global manufacturing force. They require skills and resources available here. Indians have inherent intelligence and aptitude. We have the resilience to overcome adversity, and there is a tremendous drive for hard work. You can say there is a built-in entrepreneurial spirit that is ready to be tapped into. It would be a great tragedy as a nation if you continue to ignore and misuse our human resources and the potential it has. I think this may answer some of your questions, but I had prepared something for today and what's going to happen tomorrow and where we come from and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, extremely valuable things, Jay. I think what you're again saying is that, okay, do the design properly, build the right things, focus heavily on the quality, and it doesn't matter, okay, the longevity, it has to be a sustained product. It has to be a high quality sustained product, and that particular product will make its way into the market, okay, come what may kind of stuff. So that is the sum total. Is there any other guidance in the audience? There are a lot of manufacturers and designers across. So is there any specific guidance that you want to give, Jay, at this point in time, and with your all the experience that you have gone through in setting up a high quality design shop there?
Is it for me?
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to add that design need not be expensive. Quality need not be expensive. It does not need to be cheap, but I think the new normal should be quality at a good price. You know, everybody should be able to afford quality. Why should I pay $100 and get something worth $10? I should pay $100 and get something worth $100, right? And I think everybody should look at that. I am looking at it, right? I'm not making a piece to sit in a museum all the time. I want to make a piece to sell it, right? Maybe make a lesser profit, but it's got to be as good or anybody else in Europe, or better than Europe.
Okay. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Samartha.
Yeah. Sumanth?
Yeah, thank you, Samartha. Thank you, Jay. So, going to the next topic here. Federico,
yes,
thank you for joining this. I mean, one of the most important aspects of what we wanted to also discuss was the FDI and FDI for offshore manufacturing in India, basically. So this will also create a lot of competition, lot of value in terms of the local market as well. And we have been discussing this over the years, and I have put some numbers here, which I would like to just read out to our viewers. So India imports about 78 billion from Europe, of which Italy is 5.2 billion. India imports 80 million under the category furniture, lighting, and prefab buildings. Germany, being the largest exporter to India, accounts to 115 for the same category. Whereas when you look at China, export to India is 73 billion, of which furniture, lighting, and prefab buildings account for 2 billion, right? So as per the market research of and Elcoma, the LED lighting market, which we have already spoken about multiple times, it accounts for 85%. The imports are from China. Overall, when we look at the import from overall imports, when we look at coming to India for lighting, it's just 1% of that import come from Italy in the lighting business. So what are the effects of COVID-19 on the manufacturing industry in Italy? Or what implications would it have for the future sales? Do you see more opportunity or do you see more threat?
Yes. So we were the first country in Europe and actually globally after China to experience the COVID-19. So we definitely had a big impact also related to the lack of information that we had being one of the first countries to face the emergency, and all the impacts on the sanitary crisis, on the restrictions to apply to the movement of people and goods, and on the measures to apply on the economy. So looking backwards, the effect on March when the lockdown started and overall on the first quarter of the year were severe. Like March itself, according to data, we had a contraction of the production of 16.6% in total in the country, and in the whole quarter, the first quarter of the year, minus 5.5%. So that's a big impact that we had on the manufacturing in general, especially considering the fact that most of the companies in Italy are so-called small and medium enterprises. So 92% of the companies are considered as small and medium sized, so with a total turnover below 50 million euros. So it means that the number of our manufacturing units are typically more vulnerable and highly interconnected with one another. So also, the extension of the lockdown is makes it difficult for some companies to try to open up before, because as long as the whole amount of companies in the industrial scenario open up, then they cannot fully function. So looking at the future, the impact that we will see is definitely severe. The estimation on the total GDP for the country is brutal, like it's ranging in between -6 and -12% over the next 9 months. And so these are all the threats that are in place, which are mostly related to the availability of liquidity that keep the businesses on the market. There are, of course, also opportunities. The main opportunity that I see for the country is related to the digitalization. So within Europe, we are definitely the country which is mostly lagging behind in terms of use of digital tools in the processes, in terms of product development. So we are a little bit far behind. And just in March, we had a skyrocketing of online transactions, which are in general, just because we were starting from a very low amount, and then during the lockdown, those actually spiked. So that's the biggest opportunity that I see at the moment, to really fill that gap and increase the digitalization of us as individuals, as companies, and to increase that connection with the rest of Europe and the world.
So, what do you think about the offshore manufacturing unit, especially due to this SCM disruption which is happening, which is we ourselves are facing a lot of issues where we have to deliver to our customers. Even though, for example, even if the lockdown opens here, we still can't do any work at site, and this is there for probably most of the integrators or the vendors or the dealers out there. So what do you see the challenges? What challenges do you see you face to open an offshore manufacturing?
So in general, we see that a trend towards the local sourcing in general. That means that for us as an Italian manufacturing company, in order to tackle the Indian market, then to consider an offshore manufacturing unit is probably going to be even more relevant in the future in order to be closer to that specific market. So in a way, I see a reduction in that trend of globalization that in terms of manufacturing, at least, that we have seen in the past decade. Our biggest challenges are related to the, one aspect relates to the high degree of craftsmanship that we put in most of our manufacturing processes. And that's not just related to Panzeri, but in general, the Italian products are recognized and renowned on the market for that hand interaction that that individuals, that the people put on the product. The second aspect, which is also a challenge, is the network of suppliers that we have. As mentioned before, we are mostly small companies that are highly interconnected with one another. So to exactly duplicate the business model in terms of manufacturing that we have in Italy is not so obvious in other industrial context. So there will have to be as a challenge to understand which products can actually be offshored in another country, and maybe not all of them, and some will still remain very much dedicated to our domestic production. And of course, there is a third aspect which is mostly related to regulation and bureaucracy, given the fact that we have a quite oppressive taxation system in Italy that led that forced many companies to consider offshore manufacturing in the last decade, and now they are making it a little bit more complicated and to do that. So instead of fixing the problem of the taxes, and they are kind of increasing the burden with the bureaucracy. So I would say these three are the biggest challenges, but of course, then there are plenty of opportunities, and it will probably become a requirement in order to do effectively a market, to have a localized offshore manufacturing unit.
So you said that your market is more or less interconnected in terms of the sourcing, small manufacturing units which are interconnected. So how much of the sourcing happens from China for, especially in the lighting industry? Does it come as components or does it come as finished products?
So typically, the products imported from China are finished products. Of course, we need to keep in mind that in lighting, differently from the rest of the furniture industry, we use nowadays mostly LED diodes, so that belong to the semiconductor industry, and that's highly manufactured in China. So in terms of components as well, we tend to manufacture our LED boards in Italy, but anyways, the raw material, which is at the very origin of the manufacturing process of LED, anyway start start out in China. But looking at the market in Italy, the total market size of Italy is about 1.3 billion. And out of that, only 500 million are Italian companies manufacturing for domestic. And the biggest share of the import is obviously from China. So if Italy has in our domestic market a 38% market share, China comes right after with a 33% market share. So it's very close to our positioning. That's an opportunity because, of course, in the next month, definitely the amount of goods from China will be less, in a lesser amount. On the one hand, related to the difficulties with the logistics, and also because they were closed as well, and also because of a lack of trust towards that system. So that's an opportunity, an immediate opportunity on our own domestic market to try to recover.
So what we see is challenges are almost the same, what we face here and what you face, and opportunities also seem to be the same. So let's see how we go forward with probably local sourcing, decentralizing sourcing, how it's going to shape up, and probably this is the right time for India as well, being a 3 billion market in lighting alone. I mean, India is I see the Asia APAC region is the biggest market for any of these building materials, building products. So we have to wait and watch how this whole thing is going to shape up and what kind of support we are going to get from the government as well in this regard. So one last question for you. So what would you have done different if you had known about this prior?
So as a business, probably I would have started developing e-commerce as a platform for reaching our final consumer earlier. So that relates to, say, a B2C e-commerce platform. Most of our business model is B2B, so we mostly work with architects and designers, and we work on designed projects. But of course, there is an extent to which we could market our products to the final consumer on some specific range that we have. And so in this period in which everybody is at home in a lockdown, that also presents that opportunity for individuals to spend more time at home and perhaps to think about changing the interior design or improving or making some tweaks to the interior design of our home spaces. And so if we would have had an e-commerce platform in place, maybe that could have presented an opportunity to make some sales in that period. That's definitely something I would have anticipated. And in general, as an individual, we all, at least from our side in Italy, we kind of underestimated at the very beginning the spread of the virus. So we would have I would have definitely self-regulated myself further in terms of movement outside the regions in order to keep the spread even more under control.
Thank you, Federico. Thank you for your time. We know that Lombardy-Milan region is the most affected region. Hoping we all come out of this very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to hand over to Samartha to conclude this particular session with supply.
Yeah. A lot of very good insights, Federico. We learned a lot from there. Okay. Just to conclude, one thought process is, I mean, we definitely, Federico has already said that they are looking at -7 to -12% growth. I think most of the market, European market, will be at that level. US is also a negative growth. So we are in for a bigger depression. That's loud and clear there. Okay, in this kind of a scenario, Pradyumna, you being an investment banker and you seeing macroeconomic points from various angles, the world supply chain will come to a grinding halt. Okay, I might be exaggerating, but okay, looks like okay there is a potentiality of that the entire ASEAN comes to a grinding halt. Right now, it is in a grinding halt, but we are thinking that it is like a few weeks kind of stuff. And in various places, we have already seen that it is gone up to 3 months kind of a halt. So I don't know how long this halt will continue. So one question is what happens to all the work in progress and all the finished goods that's out there, and what's the kind of hit that okay globally the markets will see in the construction industry, and locally what happens to the manufacturers in the construction industry, and how do you see the recovery happening from there?
Sure. So if you look at the industry as a whole, I think, currently we have a very unique situation. This is something, like P&G quite very long back kind of synthesized, and they said it's called the bullwhip effect, right? So by the time you have either a dip in demand or a surge in demand and your supply catches up, because of the number of levels or the amount of time in the supply chain itself that it reaches the end consumer and both of them kind of match, you're going to have some amount of friction, right? You're going to have an oversupply, or you're going to have an over demand or an unmet demand, and this is going to lead to some kind of friction, which is what we're kind of seeing. Because the one, I mean, it might not necessarily be a good thing, but the one thing that we have to say in terms of efficiency is that our supply was hit first, right? If it was the demand that was hit first and we were over manufacturing, we would have an issue because a lot of what we have been exporting would get hit. But right now, China is trying very hard, being the sole exporter for the whole world. China is trying really hard to kind of get back or bounce back to a state when they will be able to continue production that they were, let's say, in December. But I mean, like the numbers also say, they're not 100% there yet, and it's not good. It's not likely that they will reach that kind of state at least in the next 3 to 6 months, right? The honest truth is many of these manufacturers are not incentivized to manufacture at smaller production levels as well. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that even if it is within their capacity to start production again, it might not be economically feasible for them to do it, which means there are very important hard conversations that are going to be had between customers and suppliers on an inability to kind of meet supply needs. But this is a 3 to 6 month kind of cycle that we have to anyway go through. It's not something that's that's not foreseen. We have known from January, February that this situation would probably come up the second China was affected and the factory started shutting down. We have prepared to a large extent, but by the time the economic resurgence kind of happens, I think countries are going to go about it in a phased manner. So India will probably recover faster into getting business off the ground, which should be advantageous for us. But if you look at US, by the time the demand in the US is met with the supply from China, we might have that amount of time for ourselves to kind of stabilize, at least, considering that our supply chains are built around the same organizations.
Interesting what you say, Pradyumna. I think, there is a lot of the efficiencies that were built for mass production in China. That I think is going to take a large hit, and that's also an opportunity. Apart from the emotional backlash, as Federico was saying, there is no trust on that country. So there is definitely impact there, and the cost efficiencies will go down on China. That particular angle is also a very encouraging fact for all the local sourcing. I really encourage all the local manufacturers and how we need to send out the message for all the local manufacturers, local component vendors across the construction industry to really utilize this particular opportunity and help India grow.
Right.
Okay, and anything from the government that you are seeing, Pradyumna? Any early signs, any early indicators which have come in?
Sure. So the government has been very, very stringently kind of working on some kind of an economic package, right? So they have a number of divisions within the government who've been trying to build out certain ways in which they can push this impetus either through financial policy or through some schemes that they can provide this impetus to the government, mostly from a Make in India kind of initiative. But I think what is critical, I mean, manufacturing everything in India would not make economical or humane sense, right? So there are some certain products that we don't want to manufacture in India, but we just like to import. But finding out what those single points of failure are, and the government trying to provide impetus to those single points of failure industries, right? For example, Federico was mentioning about the fact that they do the chip assembly or the motherboards are completely done in Italy. Now those are single points of failure, right? So if that crashes, their product will not go to market. But identifying those and providing the impetus to those industries, I think would be critical. But I think from a governance standpoint, while they are working on something, since this is so huge as a phenomena, I think it's going to take some amount of time before they are able to execute it or put it to action.
Yeah. So yeah, I haven't even seen any kind of thing across the thing. Okay, so hopefully the finance minister will come out with certain thought process in how to encourage the local manufacturing. I think it should be done faster, because as we have started seeing some parts of unlocking which is happening, and as Nelson was mentioning that there is a lot less impact in towns like in Mangalore and other places. Okay, so we should probably look at getting some early things done from the government in terms of local manufacturing, local sourcing kind of a movement. There has to be a movement. There has to be a fiscal movement. Okay, of flagging it big from the government, a great initiative coming from there, and then encouraging the entrepreneurs with shops and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, providing capital to the local manufacturers is also very important. Okay, because if you look at the way South Korea recovered from where it was primarily because there was a huge money. There was almost 11 billion kind of a money which was in NIPA, which South Korea was funding to all the entrepreneurs. 50% of all the capital cost for the first year was taken by the government. So probably something of that particular thing, a huge impetus coming from the government will be very encouraging, apart from just the spirit. Okay, one is raising the spirit. Jay was mentioning that we need to raise the spirit, and there is an entrepreneurial spirit already in India, and it is very deep. And apart from raising the spirit, if there is a 50% cost capital for the first year for all the new entrepreneurs who are coming in and trying to establish a local sourcing kind of a stuff, it will be a great thing actually, even if it comes as a capital or a debt or whatever it comes from the government, and if that gets facilitated, because capital is going to India is becoming the safe haven for capital, and a lot of capital will flow into India, and if it is routed properly and that would be a great thing that the government can do at this point in time. Right. Okay, over to you, Sumanth. I think if there are, you will be doing the Q&A, right? Curated Q&A.
Yeah, probably we can take this offline in terms of the Q&A. I will just ask few questions among them. Before that, I would like to thank all the panelists here. Thank you, Mr. Smaran. Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Thank you, Mr. J. Thank you, Mr. Federico. Thank you, Pradyumna.
Thanks, Sumanth. This is my first webinar for the record. It's been a good experience. And great talking to all you guys and this, the treasure house of knowledge that is there across.
Same here. I look forward to meeting all you guys in Bangalore.
Bangalore too, sometime.
And having you over in Calcutta. Yes.
Please come to Bangalore too sometime. It's a small town, but
It's a nice town. I like Bangalore. Yeah. I think it's a very livable town. Yes.
So, Mr. Ravi, there's a question: how would sustainability and luxury both bring a change to the architecture after the pandemic? How do we convenience our clients about the situation and importance of material? How do we convince our clients about the situation and importance of materials that we have been sourced from elsewhere?
I think more and more that architects have to evolve into a space where they can be creative in their ingenuity, to try and do designs where that they can incorporate materials which are locally available or in the proximity of 400 kilometers within the place where they originate the design or a building. Try and see how we can incorporate. Some of the products are absolutely unavoidable. I mean, for example, even today, certain segments of your light still has to come from an overseas manufacturer. It's very difficult to try and see how we can incorporate that completely as a local sort of purchase idea. Other than that, I think sustainability also means that we need to sort of introspect and what is my vernacular. I mean, that's talking about Jeffrey Power. I mean, he is not Sri Lankan. He was not Sri Lankan, but to come from a different space of time. I mean, he was Sri Lankan in certain ways because of his maternal and parental sort of connects. But otherwise, if you look at it, the way he sort of recaptured an Asian or a Southeast Asian understanding of making architecture and building is fantastic. So I mean, when you go to Bali, my very dear friend who's no more, Made Vijaya, the way he transformed the landscapes of the ground and reinterpreted the idea of what was absolutely local, which is already there, to reharness that and put it into an international platter, which was appreciated from every space of the world, is fantastic. So I think that's exactly what we need to sort of investigate and try and arrive at internally. It's not important that a new material or a new product invented in the market is the only answer to recreate a new paradigm shift in design. So that position of convincing only us as architects can do with people. In some of the other forums that I've been discussing, people are talking about having a barricade around Bombay now. They want to do like a Hong Kong pass to Bombay, that anyone who would enter Bombay should get a visa. The workers, the laborers, the occupant, and who's going to live there, who will not live there. And at some point of time, I mean, looking at the way Bangalore is growing, and I see a lot of social websites where people are saying, outside, Kannadiga boys, please go away. There's a lot of such huge, loud voices that scream. You go to Whitefield, you can't find people speaking anymore the local language. Of course, I believe in Jai Jagat. Boundaries are not parameters of how everything gets governed. But within that parameter, the exploitation becomes immensely destructive to the nature of its land. So therefore, it is a both and phenomena. You have to do it and at least program, manage the whole process in such a way that you can control it. So I think we have to try and become as local as possible. I mean, companies, for example, like Ivory Edge and IvorySense. I mean, you guys have done a fantastic job in bringing the perspective of quality lighting to India from the world space. You bring consultants, you yourself are specialists in how you can program and do a lot of work, and also bring the technology and light fixture. But also in parallel, it is possible to reinvent certain amount of ideas locally to create that quality of ambience and the necessity in an ingenious way in an Indian method. I think that's exactly what we have to grab. You know, looking at the position of China, you know, you can't, they are also victims of the present situation. You know, we cannot just, without taking them to court and proving them guilty, we cannot all cast them out and say that they are the victims and they are the, you know, people who generated this man-made virus and make an assumption and put legislation. I think it's too early to do that. I mean, you know, you can't call a man, you know, a murderer until he's proven guilty. So let's wake up to that call. And trust me, the Chinese are not going to be stepping behind in the surge to want to grab the economy. You know, as much as all of us want to be in that space and get the lion's share, regardless of the amount of restrictions that we can program manage as political, you know, governance, we will fail miserably. Trust me, we have failed repeatedly. You know, we will fail miserably, and we have to be aware. And only consciously, if we are able to, you know, wake up to that. Like what Jay said, it's almost what they manufacture is equivalent to what they import from China. You know, in spite of being Italian, you know, they are the capital of manufacturing products, you know, program country. They make every tool that cuts everything in the world. Even you go to the German factory, you'll find Italian, you know, tools which are cutting the granite or making the tile or processing an information, and it's always Italian. I mean, in spite of that capability, you know, they are equivalent to, in terms of the number games, what we saw today with China. So we have to introspect. The only thing that we can do is we are the people and we can bring the change. And this has to be a consensus. It cannot be a strategy. It cannot be governance.
I'll just, Samartha, can I just add a little bit of...
Yeah, please.
See, post this shutdown, I mean, we had shut our offices about 3-4 days before we, you know, we were told to do it. In the first 2 weeks, we were probably working to about 40% of our capabilities, and it's slowly come to about 60% with all the problems. But I think there's going to be a little bit of a shift in the way. I'm only talking from, you know, I'm probably, as architects, we are the end users of these products, just one step away from the ultimate users. But I think some things are going to change in the sense that this insistence of having a physical meeting, physical discussions, and people are okay now. That will slowly change. I think there's going to be a little more virtual collaborations that will happen. I think this is given us opportunities to kind of efficiently work as teams rather than, you know, like a single author, architect kind of a scenario. I think as far as design is concerned, the architecture is concerned, I guess there's going to be a little bit more focus towards optimization of what we can now build, because like it or not, I mean, I'm not one to further a doomsday scenario or anything like that, but I think we have to rethink everything because people are going to spend less. That is a reality that that we need to kind of be prepared for, whether in the event, I mean, whether it becomes an eventuality or not. I think optimization, people being a little careful about what they spend on, these mega projects, mega house. I mean, even the size of houses that people, it was madness the way people build. Okay, sometimes it's, you know, sometimes, you know, you ask this question: who's going to sit and actually forget about maintenance? Your daily maintenance. Who's going to clean your house? I mean, how much ever automation you're talking about? There's going to be a limit. So I guess some sense, good sense, hopefully will prevail for the good of the world in the sustainability sense. And I guess that's it. I guess it's time to rethink. It's given us time to introspect. I know every place is dealing with this problem very differently in terms of how it's been managed. I mean, hats off to a state like Kerala and even the administration of my own district, with the proximity to the dangers that they were, the way they've managed it without policing it too much. I think as a society we have done well. It's sad that there are bad stories coming out of places like the US and stuff like that. But I think this, we are a generation which are witnessing this. I don't think it's once in a lifetime kind of a thing. Hopefully, I don't think this is there are people who are going to say that this is going to happen more often, but I hope this is the only time that this will happen. And if it happens again, we should be a little more prepared.
So, Mr. Smaran, I have 3 of the questions which I've combined for you. How would architects prioritize sourcing from local Indian manufacturers versus buying from large global conglomerates? Also, what would be the behavioral change of people who are already importing from world, China, Italy, everywhere, right? So, what behavioral change would you want to bring? Buying behavioral change would you want to bring in the minds of the people?
I think definitely there are 2 factors that will come into picture. One, I think, given that supply chains are going to be affected, there's going to be a huge question mark on time. There was always a lead time depending on what you would import, whether it was furniture, whether it was lights, 3 weeks to 4 months, depending on what you were getting from where. And given that supply chains now are going to be dodgy, and it's not like one rule applies to all of them. It depends on what country, what company, where they are with this whole thing. I think that's going to play on clients' minds and architects' minds in terms of project completion and the commitments you can make. I also foresee costs going up, given that the set ways of supply now are dismantled because of the pandemic. So I think it will take time. I don't know how much time, 6 months, 1 year, for all these companies abroad to set up their systems again. And that would also mean a lot of cost for customers. And like Nelson rightly pointed, I think people are going to be more conscientious about the buck they spend now. And there's going to be a lot of onus on the value for money and for time. And I think both of these factors will kick in. That will prompt people to look for solutions that are more local, and hopefully, like we've been discussing, if people look at this as an opportunity and if something can come out of this, then there's a lot of hopefully there'll be a lot of options locally available for us as alternate sources to source from. That's what I see.
Thank you, Mr. Smaran. So, because of the time, in the interest of the time, and we have been overshooted on the time, so we would take the rest of the questions offline, and we will have them answered from the panelists. Thank you once again, everyone. Thank you, the speakers today. We will come back shortly again on a different topic. Yes.
So thanks everyone. Thanks all the panelists. Really a great pleasure to understand from you guys. Smaran, thank you for emphasizing the local sourcing and giving the perspectives on the local sourcing. Nelson sir, thank you for talking about the sustainability and how we need to be simple and sustainable kind of a stuff. So that's the angle that you had taken. Ravi, thank you so much on the overall space design thought process and repurposing and how to do the whole whole construction, whole design, multi thought process kind of a view. Okay, the way you put it across. And thanks, Jay, for insights on relentless sensitivity to design and the quality that you are pushing and trying to take on the biggies and the European competitors on the furniture world. And good luck to you. And Federico, really thank you for giving the insights on how the Italy is functioning. And we wish you really well, and we wish the entire humanity well. Okay, so speedy recovery for everyone and speedy recovery for the globe. And Pradyumna, sincere thanks for giving the inputs on the macroeconomic factors and also specifically for the construction industry, the knowledge that you brought in terms of statistics and those kind of things. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Sumanth, we'll conclude with taking all the questions offline, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, all the attendees. I apologize for a little overshoot, but the topic was so interesting, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Just, yeah. Bye bye. Sumanth, we can leave this one, right?
Yes, yes.